tonight's lecture is part of the Provost lecture series on women in leadership. This is an ongoing program, as you know, and it was designed to showcase prominent and successful women in leadership, and in leadership positions, actually, in an effort to motivate the next generation of women leaders. We launched this last year, and the series aims to bring to Stevens women researchers, scholars and leaders in science, engineering, and business to share their experiences with the Stevens community, and since we're videotaping this beyond the Stevens community. The goal is to inspire our community, to inspire not only our female faculty and students, but the entire community. It is important because if you see the statistics that I'm going to be mentioning, we're not doing such a great job in having women in STEM positions. It is relevant today, this topic of STEM. Despite our awareness of how important STEM fields are for our future, and I can call upon numbers such as 80 to 85%, depending on who you listen to, of our GDP depends directly, is related to technology today. And if you look at the number of people that produce the technology, is less than 4% of the workforce in the United States. So the importance of technology and STEM education is extremely important. But if you've seen, a couple weeks ago, the New York Times Magazine published an article where the title was, "Why are there still so few women in science?" I don't know if you've seen it.
Yes.
It has a very dramatic picture in front. And the picture it's actually a 1927 picture that was taken in the occasion of the Solvay Conference on Physics, which brought up 29 prominent scientists, physicists, 17 of whom either had or were about to get afterwards a Nobel Prize. And only one out of the 29 was a woman. And those of you that haven't read the article, tell me who you think she was. Anybody?
Marie Curie.
Marie Curie. So today, current data do not paint any better picture. A recent study by the National Science and Math Initiative revealed that only 13% of bachelor degrees in engineering are held by women. 23% of workers in STEM-related jobs are women, despite the fact that they make up 48% of the workforce. And the higher you go in the corporate ladder, the less and the lower those percentages become. According to another report by the National Center of Women in Information Technology, women hold just 9% of the IT management positions and account for only 40% of the senior management positions in Silicon Valley, in the startup world. All told, it's more imperative than ever now that we provide a forum to showcase the accomplishments of women leaders in these fields. And we hope that others will inspire us and will inspire the next generation. I'm confident that it is because of the efforts of women like Valerie Aurora that we have with us today that this goal will be achieved. So, as many of you know, Valerie is with us today as a keynote speaker for the day-long conference organized by the College of Arts and Letters that was devoted in celebrating the accomplishments of Ada Lovelace, a truly remarkable woman of her own right. Ada is considered to be the very first computer programmer, and said to be the inspiration behind much of the computer technology that has become a routine for us today. Ms. Aurora has drawn inspiration from the life and works of Ada Lovelace in founding the Ada Initiative, a non-for-profit organization that seeks to increase the participation of women in open technology and to advance women's leadership in the technology sector. Today, the Ada Initiative reaches 2 million leaders and emerging professionals in the tech sector and related fields through various outreach efforts that have been supported in part by Google, Mozilla, Microsoft, Bloomberg, the Linux Foundation, and Twitter. In addition to serving as the executive director of the Ada Initiative, Valerie has also invented several new file system concepts, including relative A-time and power saving features in file systems widely used in Linux, Mac OS X, Solaris, and OpenBSD. She served as senior software engineer at IBM, Intel, and Micro Systems, Sun Microsystems. They were in California for some time. And currently, she serves as a consultant and senior software engineer at Red Hat, a leading global provider of open source solutions. In 2011, Femonomics listed Aurora as number 3 amongst the top 50 women to watch in technology, and in 2012, SC Magazine named her one of the most influential people in computer security. She holds a double degree in computer science and mathematics from the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, and continues to inspire women across the globe to study these disciplines and apply them in a creative and impactful way. So I'm really thankful for the organizers of the conference of having captured Valerie and brought her here today. I'm thankful to her for willing to spend some time with us this evening to give us a flavor of what it is to be a woman in leadership and what it is to inspire others to go into step forward. So with that, Valerie, thank you.
Thank you so much for the very flattering introduction. I forgot I used to do those things. I want to make one quick correction. This is amazingly correct for an introduction. I don't currently work at Red Hat anymore. Ada Initiative is my full-time job. But Red Hat, great company. So yes, I am super excited to be here. It was not at all difficult to capture me. Ada Lovelace has been a long-time interest of mine, and I'm just so excited to even get to attend this conference, much less get to speak at it. So thank you, Robin Hammerman, and everyone who made this possible. So I'm going to talk today about rebooting the Ada Lovelace Mythos. I'll talk quickly about my nonprofit first. The Ada Initiative, named after Ada Lovelace, is a nonprofit dedicated to supporting and increasing the participation of women in open technology and culture. So that includes open source software, which is what's behind most of the internet, most of Google, most of Facebook. If you've ever used Firefox, that's all open source software. I co-founded the Ada Initiative in 2011 after a friend of mine was groped for the 3rd time in 1 year at an open source software conference. I just had it, and that's what I needed to do to change things and make the industry better for women. The Ada Initiative has several lead projects. Probably the most famous is the conference anti-harassment policy. This is my solution to this kind of physical assault, but also like pornography and sexist jokes that were common in our field, which many people just react to and say, that's unthinkable, but that was how things were in 2011 and still are in many other fields. We've also done the Ada Camp Unconference for women in open technology and culture. It's incredibly fun. We get women together from the open library technology movement, from Wikipedia, from open hardware, building little blinking lights into your jackets and things like that. It's really fun, and we do training as well. We're supported almost entirely by individual donations. The conference sponsorships only go so far, and you can support us yourself if you'd like. All right, I've done that. Now I get to talk about Ada Lovelace. So the very short version, this is a little ironic because half of you have spent the day learning all about Ada Lovelace, and half of you may have never heard of her before. So there will be a lot of review, but I'll try to make it interesting. So she wrote the world's first computer program in 1843. Yes, that's 1843. That's 160 years ago. It was written for a computer that didn't exist and was not built, but it was still a computer program. She was known during her lifetime and even today mostly as the only legitimate daughter of the poet Lord Byron. And she died at age 36 after a very painful illness, cutting off a promising career. So there's a lot of people who like to imagine if she had lived, perhaps the computer age would have started in 1850 instead of 1950. So it's sort of you can see why a myth built up around this amazing person. So the questions I wanted to explore for this talk were to first talk about what are the stories we tell, what is the mythos today about Ada Lovelace? What are the effects of those stories on our society today and the people around us and our technology? And what new stories could we tell that had better effects? So here's what to expect in the talk, so you aren't wondering where things are going. I'm going to start out with a cast of characters, the people who are important in the Ada Lovelace myth. I'm going to give a hopefully rather brief biography of Ada, but covering the important points that come out in the various versions of the stories. And I'm going to talk about how Ada was viewed through history, not just the different ways she's viewed today, but how her reputation changed and evolved as time went by. And then I'm going to talk about my ideas for new stories to tell. And hopefully you can bring your own. So start out with the obvious person. The most famous person in this story is Ada's father, the poet Lord Byron, George Gordon. He was wildly famous in his lifetime. He's often considered to be the most famous person in Europe up to that point in time, sort of like a rock star, basically. The flip side, and I'm going to make some Byron fans angry possibly, is that even by the standards of his time, Lord Byron was a violent, abusive, serial sexual predator. And he came from a long line of people similar to him. His father was called Mad Jack. His great uncle was called the Wicked Lord. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of him, for doing things like shooting his coachman and throwing him in the body on his wife in the carriage and driving home. And because at the time, he was a nobleman, he wasn't actually punished for this. So Byron himself was famously described as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. So, and I just want to note, you can appreciate his poetry while also acknowledging that he was kind of a terrible human. So he died at age 36 of illness, far from home, and cut off an amazing career. He was only partway through many fantastic works of poetry, and we are all the worse for this. Ada's mother is an interesting person as well, a little less famous, but just as strong a personality, I believe. Her name is Anne Isabella Milbank, often known as Annabella. She was minor nobility and the strong, independent daughter of a strong, independent mother. Byron used to call her the princess of parallelograms here. She was very interested into mathematics and had that sort of like rational, logical mind, or at least expressed herself that way. I don't think this was a compliment, personally. You can read some of his poetry and find out. So Byron left after only a month into their marriage, and Annabella got really tired of all the abuse and separated. So Byron didn't see Ada again after she was about a month old. And Annabella put a lot of effort into raising Ada in order to try to reduce these poetical tendencies, which is what they called it. And you look at the family history, you can see why she was so nervous. So our final character is Charles Babbage, who is a really famous inventor, mathematician, engineer. That just covers a few of his careers. who was famous in his own time, but also was famous for he was a character. He was known for his hatred of street music, which I don't know if you've ever heard the joke about paying the violinist to go away from your table. That's what street music was in London, in Victorian London. He designed but never built the world's first general purpose computer that conforms to our modern definition of a general purpose computer that could do anything any other computer could do. These are models of parts of this computer called the analytical engine. He designed it in the 1830s. So Ada and Babbage met when she was 17 and he was 41, and they continued as good, close personal friends and scientific collaborators for nearly 20 years until her death. Yes, that does make sense. So Ada, we get to talk about Ada. So her full name was Augusta Ada Byron. When she married William King, she became Augusta Ada Byron King, and later became the Countess of Lovelace. So, but strangely, we have this modern construction of her name as Ada Lovelace. Not quite sure how that came about, but that's who people are talking about. During her lifetime, she was known primarily as Lord Byron's daughter. This is how I like to give an idea of what her life was like as this. So Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love, both famous rock stars, have one daughter, Frances Bean Cobain. He kills himself very early on. So the interesting thing about Frances Bean is that Frances Bean, I was trying to find a picture of her, and she has succeeded, good for her, in not having a single photograph of her in the public domain. She's trying really hard to protect her privacy, and you can see why. She's trying to define her own life and her own personality as an artist. So she recently did a display of her visual art. She's a visual artist under a pseudonym, and it was later on discovered. So this has an interesting parallel with Ada in that she was very concerned about putting her name on any of her scientific work or publications, and you can see why. So here's a panel from Sidney Padua's Adventure of Lovelace and Babbage. Sidney, raise your hand. It's a fantastic comic about Ada Lovelace's, a fictionalized version of Lovelace and Babbage's collaboration. But this is a really perfect summary of Lady Byron's plan to keep Ada from going nuts and shooting her way across Europe. So she decided she would teach her mathematics to counteract the poetical influences, which is how Byron referred to his tendency to be a terrible person. So the interesting thing about this is that at the same time she fulfilled all of the normal standards for women of her time in her position, she had many other interests, including music and specifically playing the harp. She wanted to build a flying machine using steam engines and studying birds to do so. And an interesting thing I love, she loved horseback riding, and it was considered like good for her health. This is a picture of her daughter, Lady Anne Blunt, who dressed up as a Bedouin and traveled across northern Africa with her husband in the late 19th century, and ended up founding the most influential Arabian horse stud outside of Saudi Arabia. She's a very interesting person, along with Ada. So luckily for Ada, having such a scientific and curious mind, amateur science was very in at the time in her society. And so she went to a lot of salons and parties where she met people like Charles Babbage, Mary Somerville, and many other of these amateur scientists whose names are in the history books these days. So she followed the proper path, got married at age 19, had 3 children. Her husband became the Earl of Lovelace, which made her the Countess of Lovelace. So she, during the time she was having 3 children in about 3 years, she wasn't able to follow her studies much, but kept them up. Once she was an adult and able to decide what she wanted to study, she continued with mathematics and found some really good tutors, in particular Augustus de Morgan, who you may be familiar from your logic and algebra classes as the namesake of De Morgan's law. He was an incredible mathematician, and he had an extraordinarily high and probably justified opinion of Ada Lovelace's potential. So Ada's looking for something to do, and at the suggestion of another scientist, what's Wheatstone's first name? Sorry. Charles Wheatstone decides to translate a paper someone else has written about Babbage's analytical engines. I think this is interesting. She was too humble to actually write her own paper. So I know, I'll translate. This is a very common thing for women in science at the time. There's an interesting note on the man who wrote the paper, Luigi Menabrea. He ended up becoming the prime minister of Italy. So the connection between computers and wealth and power, I think, was already in effect. When she sent the paper to Babbage for his approval, he said, why didn't you write your own paper? Would you like to add some notes? Ada said, sure, and thus was born the world's first computer program. It's hard to read because it's very small writing, because it's very large and complicated. So she ended up writing a program to calculate something called the Bernoulli numbers, which are an extremely complex, difficult series with great implications for science and mathematics. It was the first published computer program. So I just want to give a brief summary of the controversy over the first programmer title. We'll go over the change in public opinion about whether she was the first computer programmer in more detail. But here's the sort of the base facts behind it as filtered through my feminist consciousness. So Babbage did obviously write simple programs first because he was designing this machine and needed to figure out what it would do. He wasn't actually super interested in doing stuff with the machine. He was more interested in the machine himself. So there's a number of very simple programs in his notes. The Bernoulli numbers program was definitely the most complicated program written at that time. And we're calling a computer program like a series of instructions for a machine to carry out. The contemporary evidence is very strong that Ada actually wrote this. There's a bunch of letters. Babbage makes a comment in his autobiography that's often misinterpreted to mean he wrote it, but it really says that she wrote it. And then there's the fact that's normally very important in science, which is that Ada published it first. That's usually how you establish priority. And in addition to that, both Babbage and everyone who knew them and everyone who reads their papers agrees that Ada had a much deeper and more complex understanding of the potential of computer programming. So as far as I'm concerned, Ada is definitely for sure the first computer programmer. Unfortunately, about this time, Ada also started to become mentally and physically ill. Retroactive historical diagnosis for what they're worth. She probably had uterine cancer. She probably was bipolar, or also known as manic depressive. She began taking laudanum and pot and using mesmerists, hypnotism, to control the pain and the mania. It's around this time as well, she began gambling, which actually meant betting on the horses, not super unusual, and was probably unfaithful to her husband, although a lot of the letters from that time are destroyed. What I can say for sure is that when she told her husband what she had done on her deathbed, he refused to speak to her again until her death. So I think it was probably pretty bad for the time. This is a portrait taken of her shortly before her death. The full-size one, you can see pretty clearly that she's dying. It was pretty heartbreaking. She died at age 36, the same age as her father. And when you read her letters, she's constantly writing about how she needs to take it carefully, to develop her genius slowly, build up a body of work piece by piece, when really she was this incredible, intuitive thinker who came up with groundbreaking ideas while writing footnotes, literal footnotes to somebody else's paper, right? And you want to go back in time, just say, just write it, forget about what everyone else thinks, just do your work. It's, carpe diem, everyone here, do it now. I wrote my first paper published paper when I was 24 and not in grad school or anything. And because I didn't know you weren't supposed to, just go ahead and do it, is my view. Okay, so that's the basic sort of attempting to be pretty objective Ada Lovelace story. So how is Ada Lovelace viewed throughout history? We can start with the obvious. Byron's daughter, here's Ada down here. That was basically her whole life. This famous rock star person. So even in the initial call for papers for this conference, Robin, I hope you don't mind me calling this out, she was described as a conference about the achievements and legacy of the poet Lord Byron's only known legitimate child, Ada Lovelace. So it's definitely the thing that hung over her entire life. In 1833, she started to get a little bit of a different reputation, which was part of this amateur science scene that was going on. People noticed that she understood what Babbage was saying because nobody else did. So, but they were still, when they would write letters when they got home, they would talk about how much Ada did or didn't resemble Byron. So there was, she was smart, Byron's daughter at that point. 1838, she got a little extra edition, the Countess of Lovelace, rather than Lady King. 1843, the notes to the translation, this first computer program, were published under the initials, under just her initials, actually even her misspelled initials. But Babbage couldn't keep the secret entirely and let Menabrea know that actually it was Ada Lovelace, so a few people knew. In 1845, she discovered that she was too immoral for the library. So this is a picture of the Royal Society Library. She wanted to get in so she could read books on mathematics and things like that. And she was advised that the word of her infidelity had gotten out and she was not suited to go read books in this building. It's very much a thing. So that's one way to find out, hey, I'd like to check out this book. No, sorry, we know you're sleeping with so-and-so. What? So 1848, she was publicly acknowledged as the author of the notes. No one really cared. 1852, she dies, and now she is Byron's dead daughter. It's still, it says, yes, she was in, the second sentence after saying where she died. She was the only daughter of Lord Byron. There you go, blah, blah, blah. Then she was married to some people and stuff, and they had babies. And then it says she was distinguished for the strength of her intellect. So people noticed she was smart, at least, and that's kind of what she gets. That's all she gets in her biography. Lady Byron was kind of a mean person and spent a lot of time making sure everyone knew about Ada's faults and mistakes, starting around the time of her death. I'm not sure what her deal was, but there you go. 1864, Babbage wrote his autobiography, and in it he has a very few mentions of her. I mean, there's a sense that proper women shouldn't appear in public at all. It's like appear in the papers when you're born, when you're married, and when you died. And for the most part, she succeeded in that. So Babbage mentions her, praises her, talks about some of the work she's done. I'm not sure how many people read all the way through his autobiography, but there you go. So then we have about a century of crickets, not much going on. These are a few of the minor mentions I could find here and there. In 1889, the notes were reprinted. In 1905, she's a literal footnote in the history of calculating machines by Maurice Descamps. I kept meaning to look up how to say that, but I never did. 1932, she's mentioned in the MIT Technology Review. I was unable to find out what they said because the MIT Technology Review's paywall was not functioning, and I could not give them $9.99 to read this paper. So, common. So 1950 is where the general public begins to learn about Lovelace again through Alan Turing, who is a famous computer science pioneer and was a key part of winning World War II. So Alan is very interested in machine intelligence, artificial intelligence, and he writes about the objections to this. And he calls one of them Lady Lovelace's objection, which I think is totally unfair because he completely misinterprets what she's trying to say on purpose to make a point. Lovelace, in her notes, Lovelace is trying to counteract this idea. At the time, people were like, whoa, this thing just calculated the answer to 3 + 2. It must be living. What if I tell, there's this famous question, what if I tell it the wrong question, will it still give me the right answer? People had no idea. So she was trying to explain, these machines can only do what you tell them to do. Somebody still has to come up with the problem and code it and stick it in the machine. Turing interpreted this as, machines can never surprise you. It's like, well, no, that's not what she was saying. But the question of artificial intelligence is still alive today, of course. But yeah, at least Turing got her name back in circulation. I have no idea how he became aware of her, Like if it was a thing, everyone passed around the notes at Cambridge or something, but love to find that out. So in 1953, somebody finally uses the words first computer program. This is Bertram Bowden in Faster Than Thought, which is this hilarious attempt to write a history of computing machines in 1953. And he makes this comment of, like, I thank you so much to my printers for the fact that things are changing so quickly. I have to make corrections between each proof because stuff was being updated so quickly. So in this he says, Lady Lovelace had undoubtedly a profound understanding of the principles of the machine, etc., and then wrote, including what we should now call a program for computing the Bernoulli numbers by a very sophisticated method. So that's the first time I can really say, find someone who's not calling her Babbage's interpreter or, you know, explaining that stuff real good now. She wrote a computer program. So 1972, Isaac Asimov, you know, famous science fiction writer and science writer, calls her the mother of computers, which is interesting. I would call it the mother of programming, but you know, these things are not terribly well distinguished at the time. In 1976, the first book-length biography comes out by a historian and fashion model, Dorothy Langley Moore, which I think is a cool combination. I couldn't actually get a copy, but there is a couple of articles written for a women's mathematics newsletter, which used the words first computer programmer, and also talked about her gambling and things like that. So as far as I can tell, 1976 was the time when people said first computer programmer, and not just the first computer program. So yeah, it only took 133 years for people to come to this point. So there's 133 years of Lovelace not being the first computer programmer, being Byron's daughter, being someone who explained Babbage pretty well. And then that's when that finally happened. So 1980 is when the Department of Defense issued a new language standard and named it Ada in honor of Ada Lovelace. This is a Ada language computer program. One of the parts they skipped in my resume for the introduction is that I wrote Ada programs for a living for 6 months when I was straight out of college. Don't recommend it. It's a really unpleasant language. But naming the language after her shows the regard she was held in at that time, at least by the United States Department of Defense. So in 1985, Dorothy Stein, you can barely see this. The cover is deathly black, and I think that reflects the opinions of the author. In 1985, Dorothy Stein published the second book-length of biography of Ada Lovelace that I'm aware of, which she presents her as mad, bad, and moderately smart. So Dorothy Stein really had some kind of issues with Ada Lovelace, not sure what. But even Dorothy Stein still acknowledged that Ada wrote that first computer program. She just thought she was a terrible person. 1986, there's a very short book about Ada Lovelace and mostly her work, which is nice. I think it must have been a response to Stein based on the forward, recently some people have said. It's actually a pretty nice work, especially if you're interested in computer programming. And she's portrayed as a complex, whole, flawed person who did some good work as well. So unfortunately, it's not very popular. I really enjoy reading it, but. All right, so now we get into the wars, the full wars. I mean, Stein was not that great, but wow. 1990, Alan G. Bromley, a respected computer historian, wrote an article in which he outright denies that she's the first computer programmer, besides saying, of course, she's arrogant and deluded and all these things. While at the same time, because their letters are so clear, even he couldn't deny this. He says that she caught a bug in the program that Babbage wrote. So there's this saying that's common among computer scientists that if you write a computer program that's the very most complicated one you can write, you aren't smart enough to debug it. It's more difficult to debug a computer program than it is to write it in the first place. So that a historian of computing could make that claim, I think kind of speaks for that bias there. Also in 1990, Bruce Collier's PhD thesis calls her mad as a hatter. That's real scholarly language there, and says that she contributed little or nothing to the notes. So yeah, that's kind of awesome as well. So actually, Sydney pointed out to me an interesting point, which is that many of these people who are so passionately against Lovelace having any involvement in the first computer program are also very passionate pro-Babbage people. Charles Babbage, they're really trying to reclaim his place in computing history. Sure, his machine never got built, but he's still really important, and they're tired of people taking away his credit. So that could definitely be an issue with the whole taking away Lovelace's credit, because there's only so much credit to go around. So in 1990, we also get our first major fictional depiction of Ada Lovelace as a minor character in The Difference Engine, which is the sort of the novel that popularized the steampunk movement, which you're probably all more familiar than you want to be with. So in the book, Ada is portrayed as a mathematical genius. She's also kind of not that bright when it comes to the ways of the world and is busy trying to gamble and all that kind of stuff. So it's sort of an absent-minded professor stereotype. When you read Ada's letters, she's probably not that practical. So part of what I like about this is that they show her deriving and discovering mathematical theorems that didn't come until the 30s that are foundational. So it's a neat portrayal. 1992 is the longest, most sympathetic biography called Ada, the Enchantress of Numbers by Betty Alexandra Toole. It's mostly the letters Ada sent and some sent to her. And she presents her, she's very, very sympathetic, presents her as ambitious, complex, flawed, and brilliant. It unfortunately also tries to draw a number of analogies between the Ada programming language and Ada's thought process, which don't make a ton of sense as a computer programmer, but it's especially great as a primary source for understanding who Ada was as a person. So I'll try to go a little more quickly on the rest of these. 1993, Tom Stoppard's Arcadia. He says that Ada Lovelace was an inspiration for one of the characters, a young girl who's working with a math tutor, and continually comes up with mathematical ideas so ahead of her time that he always dismisses them as nonsense, and they're later rediscovered and hailed as the first understanding of fractals. So I thought that was a neat portrayal, very accurate to her life. In 1997, I have not been able to bring myself to watch this movie. There's a movie called Conceiving Ada, which is sort of loosely inspired by something or other. In it, Ada Lovelace figures out how to communicate back and forth with the future by the means of undying information waves. And the people in the future think she's so important, they're trying to bring her back to life by genetic engineering, or so Wikipedia tells me. So clearly, I'm pretty sure it was a positive portrayal, or at least intended to be. So, 1998, the British Computing Society creates the Lovelace Medal in her honor. This is the 2007 Lovelace Medal winner, Karen Spark Jones. The Ada Initiative considered naming ourselves after her, but Spark Jones just wasn't quite as good as Ada. Spark would have been awesome. The Spark Initiative. So 2000, Doran Swade comes up with a history of Charles Babbage's computing machines, in which he describes Ada as deluded, bossy, coquettish, and demanding, which are all like wonderfully gendered insults. I took a photo of her, of the index, entry in the index for Lovelace because I just thought it was so representative. He says, exaggeration of contribution to Babbage's engines, 166-9. Self-regard and conviction of own genius, 158-9. Babbage didn't think he was a genius. No, Babbage thought he was a genius, just in case you weren't sure. Again, another Babbageist, right? 2001, I mean, this is supposedly a book about Ada and her achievements by Benjamin Woolley, The Bride of Science, but its focus is mostly on her emotions and her life and her personal life and all that stuff. And yeah, it's not that, it's only a part of her life, shall we say. So 2009, Sue Sharman Anderson, who's in some way perhaps responsible for all of this happening, founded Ada Lovelace Day, which is now to raise the profile of women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's the STEM we keep talking about. It's grown and grown. This conference was actually scheduled to go with Ada Lovelace Day. It's just a fantastic time where people write blog posts and update Wikipedia pages about women scientists. They're just the greatest stories. All the stories we know are so boring. I think you can say at this point in time, Ada Lovelace is definitely a feminist icon in the popular imagination, if she wasn't already. 2009, by no coincidence, because they were friends, Sidney Padua put together the first and assumed to be last issue of the comic, The Origin of Ada Lovelace, which became this wonderful series called Lovelace and Babbage. In it, she and Babbage team up to fight crime. They just have different definitions of crime. She thinks it's poetry. He thinks it's music. You can see why. She's not just the like sort of the more practical person, which is what she was in their lifetime. She's also shown as like brooding and brilliant and occasionally unhinged. It's a really fun, full-featured person. It's not Ada herself, but it's a great person who could exist and you want to get to know better, and has all sorts of hilarious gags. So check it out. I can't leave out the Ada Initiative. 2011, we used Ada as our, we redid a new modern portrait of her. The Ada Initiative is focused more on open source software than software in general. We try to keep our scope. So the thing we brought to the Ada Lovelace story is that she's the world's first open source software programmer, because she published the source code to her program. And whether or not she meant it to be under any kind of license, it went into the public domain sometime in the 19th century. So anybody can take this code, alter it, and reuse it. It's open source software. So the world's first computer programmer was also a woman. It was also an open source programmer. So there's been some more recent fictional depictions, which I only learned about thanks to Vicky's talk earlier today. Here's a book came out in 2011, All Men of Genius. She's a character who's in her 60s and is successful, respected, influential, a bit naughty. I am so excited this book exists, The Lazarus Machine. In it, she co-founds a computer company with Babbage. This is great because it's a direct, it's great for many reasons, but it's a direct, she proposed this to Babbage in one of her letters. We have a letter that says, hey, Babbage, why don't you let me take care of the business and the PR? And then we could actually get these engines built. And he's like, well, no, of course not. I don't want to let go of all that control. But this is kind of a neat idea of what could have happened. And this is a new biography that just came out on Tuesday, so I haven't read it, called A Female Genius. All I can tell from the blurb is that he believes that she wrote the computer program, she was hampered by sexism, and that she and Babbage became lovers, which I see no hints of, but that's another story we can tell. So here's what I think the top 4 stories that we tell about Ada Lovelace today. And I'll talk about each one of them and what's the effect it has on society. So the first computer programmer is just like this really one-dimensional story. And it ignores all the rest of her life and perpetuates this horrible stereotype that computer programmers have to only be interested in computing. I was definitely considered a very strange person in college studying computer science because I liked my English literature class. It's just, what's wrong with you? Ada rode horses and played music. I mean, she was much more like a complex fractal, and I really want people, and besides, the good interests, she gambled and cheated on her husband and had children and had mixed feelings about her children and was trying to be a good daughter, all that stuff. So, and she was able to come up with these amazing advances in computing. So you just don't have to be this single-minded, nose-down kind of person. So as an icon for women in STEM, this is limiting, and I'm guilty of this, obviously, for several reasons, but one is that it erases the other women who were working in STEM at that time. It makes her seem like an exceptional, strange person, Lord Byron's daughters, her incredible mental gifts, which she had, but she also had the ability to have a mathematics education. And if more women had had the same mathematics education, they could have also accomplished similar things. Here are a few of her contemporaries. Marie-Sophie Germain was a physicist. Mary Somerville was one of her good friends and a mathematician and scientist. And Maria Mitchell was an astronomer. And these are all just women whose names were variations on Mary. So many, many women. The problem with the Stein take, she's a delusional, immoral, terrible person. Oh yeah, she wrote the first computer program. That's not the focus we give to male scientists. These are just these are the first 3 male scientists I thought of. And they all, Nikola Tesla, John Nash, mathematician, but and Isaac Newton, they all had terrible mental problems and terrible personal problems, but nobody diminishes their science as a result of it. Focusing on her personality in life and putting down her accomplishments as a result. I mean, people do say, well, she was so arrogant. She was clearly manic depressive, therefore she could not have written the computer program. Let's talk schizophrenic, let's talk manic depressive, let's talk, I don't know what was going on with Isaac Newton, but I'm glad it happened because it furthered science. But that's only a claim people make for women and not men. And then this is the 100% all bad, all across the way, total fraud point of view. There's this great book, if you haven't read, you need to go buy it right away. Unfortunately, I think it's out of print, but it's easy to get used. Wonder why it's out of print. It's called How to Suppress Women's Writing by Joanna Russ. It's a Bible, and you can replace all of like writing with programming or any kind of science in here, and it's all the same. So the general attacks are she didn't write it. She didn't. That's a claim people make about Ada. She wrote it, but she only wrote one of it. She only wrote one paper, you guys, clearly. She wrote it, but she had help. Look, she and Babbage corresponded because he was the only he wouldn't write down the description of his own machine. Yeah. And then there's the sort of a final one, which is she wrote it, but it's not art, and she's not an artist. And that's one of the arguments. Well, she wrote it, but it wasn't a computer program, and she was not a computer programmer. How could she be blah blah blah? She had no compiler. So that's just when you're telling that story, that's what you're subscribing to. So here are a few of my ideas for new stories we can tell. So there's this. We'll start out kind of tame. Somebody should write a history of women Victorian mathematicians in science and their influence on modern day science and computing, and include Ada Lovelace, Mary Somerville, all the rest, and things like the women's magazines that had algebra puzzles in them. So that would give you like the whole big picture instead of being like, oh, this freak who predicted computing. I like this one. I love Anne Hathaway. In a moving and sensitive portrayal, Anne Hathaway plays brilliant yet tortured Victorian scientist Ada Lovelace, exploring the conflicting pull of her passions towards mathematics, art, family, fame, and madness. Won Oscars for Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress. This is going to pass the Bechdel test, baby. And Best Picture. And I was kind of thinking of A Beautiful Mind when I wrote this. Also, Anne Hathaway. So another one, maybe you can figure out what I was thinking of here. Ada Lovelace and Mary Somerville found an academy for young women where they teach harp, horseback riding, and computer programming. The second computer program is a menstrual period tracker. Alumna instigate and lead the information revolution of 1852. I imagine that they all wear like black PVC dresses and have big X's on their chests. So yeah, that would be super fun. Ada Lovelace, see if you can get this one. Ada Lovelace, a mediocre poet at best. Oh my gosh, she was a terrible poet, you guys. Programs the analytical engine to help her write poetry, which she publishes anonymously under the name Equus Libros. All London wonders, is the author man or machine? No one suspects the truth until she reveals all in a live performance. And yes, I am talking about horse ebooks. And, and if you don't know what horse ebooks is, it's too late, it's over, you missed it. All right, so this is my last story. Ada Lovelace becomes the first literal rock star rather than the figurative one her father was, playing computer-generated music and inventing electronic amplification of instruments. She makes millions and blows it all on harps, horses, and laudanum. Babbage refuses to speak to her ever again. That would be a freaking great story. I mean, she had that mentality. It would be great. So so this is sort of trying to look at like even the positive stories, unquote, that we tell and showing how limited they are and how they limit women in science and our society in general. I didn't even get into the part where, because Ada Lovelace was so multidimensional and complex, I think a computing founded by her would have been immediately connected with the arts and humanity in a way, the humanities in a way modern computing, which grew out of World War II, was not. It would have been so interesting. And so that's part of what I want to tell here with these stories. It's like, computing can be so much more and so much better connected with our society and ourselves. And also, as a woman, you can be a whole person. you can have a family, you can sleep around, you can do drugs, and you can still do fantastic, amazing work. You know, guys have been able to do this for a long, long time. Just check it out. But I think that would be really cool. All right, so questions and answers. If you have any great Ada Lovelace story ideas, that would be wonderful to hear too. Thank you. Okay, the question is, if the students here are inspired by this, what can they, but they don't want to write an Ada Lovelace story, what can they do? And I really want people to write Ada Lovelace stories. One of the things I'm doing as a hobby right now is learning how to make zines. You know, just little paper printouts of a few pages that you can are so cheap you can just give them away. I think learning more about the history of computing, but also like the general forms of sexism is frankly a great idea to learn how you're using it in your everyday life. One of the first things I learned from joining a women in computing group after I discovered I was the only Linux kernel programmer in the world who was female in 2002. There are simple rules like, if you're trying to help a woman learn something on the computer, never take away the keyboard. Very simple rule, follow that, you'll do a lot better. Wait for women to speak and give the answers to questions, things like that. So, but I really think you should go out and draw or make a rap video or something like that. So.
Okay, wow. What a wonderful story. Said and expressed. So thank you very much.